Hi everybody. Before you take your unit test, I wanted to go over the answers, and I'm going to post these also so that you can um, look at them. If you have a printer, you can print them, but I wasn't sure who had access to that, so I wanted to explain it to you. So I know I had you turn it in on Classroom. It's not a grade, but I wanted to make sure that you were doing it and holding you accountable. And I thank those of you that actually took the time to do it. I could see, um, and I did open them up and take a look at your answers and see what you did. So thank you for those of you who did that. Okay. Before you take your test, I want to go through and just make sure you understood what these questions were. So number one asked about diversity. We Diversity doesn't really have much to do with evolution, but it is verbiage that is used often when we're talking about evolution and variation. And so I just wanted to make sure that if that word was used in a test question, you understood it. So diversity just means having a variety of something. The more diverse your population is, the more different kinds of something that you have. Okay, number two, what is extinction? Give examples of what could cause extinction. You should have had that extinction is just the total loss of a species, and it can be caused by things like environmental change, disease, loss of food source, etc. We had conversations about that when we were all still sitting back together in the class, so hopefully you remember that. What types of conditions are necessary to create a fossil? So in class, we talked a lot about how things die all the time in nature, but they don't pile up and we don't see fossils everywhere. Fossils are actually very hard to find. So the answer to number three is that fossils are only formed when they are buried very quickly. So whether that's sand or mud or even dirt in some cases, or snow or ice, that's whenever you have a fossil, whenever it gets buried up before it can decompose. Okay. Number four, parts of an organism that are more likely to become fossils than rock are things like bone, teeth, and shells. And that's because they are the hard parts. They take longer to decompose. Okay, number five, the first types of organisms found on the earth. It seems like forever ago that we created those really long strips of paper, our geologic timescales. But if you can envision those in your mind, and you should still have the paperwork in your notebook, the very first types of organisms that we have found fossils of on the planet are single-celled organisms, also known as bacteria. And if you remember on our paper, that was the really big, long chunk of time where it was mostly just bacteria. Number six is not on your test. I took it off and I forgot to take it off of the review sheet, but I'm going to leave it on here anyhow. The law of superposition, we skipped a lab just because I couldn't do it with you on the computers. But the law of superposition states that organisms found deeper in the earth are more likely older than the organisms found above them. It's common sense, but it's written in a rule, and that is just something that we kind of skipped over just due to our circumstances. Number seven, the difference between an observation and inference. That this goes back to the footprint lab that we did in class. Remember, if you are making an observation, that is something that you can see or measure. It's a type of data. It's fact. An inference is a educated assumption that you make about the data or observations that you've made. So an inference isn't something way out in left field, but it is a guess based on what you do know. Okay. Number eight, how old is the Earth? We talked about the fact that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old according to science. Some textbooks say 4.6. It's actually somewhere in between those two, 4.5 and 4.6 billion years. But we are going to go with the answer 4.5 because that's what our book said. Mutations, number nine. You guys, I feel like I have written so much about mutations for you over the last few weeks, and I'm concerned that some of you are maybe still struggling with a mutation. Remember that, and here's the answer. A mutation is any change in your DNA, any change at all. We talked about the fact that it can happen because of foods that you eat, or it can happen because of your exposure to radiation or chemicals, or it can be completely random. It can happen for no reason at all. Anytime your DNA changes, whether that happens while an organism is developing as an embryo, or if it happens as an adult, that change is known as a mutation. And because it's in your DNA, it can be passed on to your offspring. Okay? All right. Number 10, what is an adaptation? Well, any mutation that makes you better in your environment is an adaptation. And the same mutation may not be an adaptation in a different environment. We talked a little bit about, deer, brown deer in Pennsylvania. Being brown is an adaptation. The mutation that causes that brown coat color is a good thing because they are camouflaged. If you take that same exact deer, same mutation, put it in the Arctic in the ice, it's no longer camouflaged, so the mutation causing brown is now a negative. It's not an adaptation. So the answer to number 10 is any mutation that makes you better suited to your environment is known as an adaptation. Number 11, natural selection. Okay, so it is really important to me, and as I read through some of our dodo bird answers, I am concerned that some of you don't understand that natural selection is a process. It is something that happens because of mutations and because of the environment. So the definition for natural selection is organisms better suited or better adapted to their environment are more likely to survive and reproduce and pass those desirable traits on to their offspring. Okay? In the case of the whale, we talked about whales that had longer tails or lost their hind legs were better swimmers, and so they were more successful to life in the water. And so those whales that had that mutation survived and had babies, and their babies had those same positive characteristics. In the case of the dodo bird, the birds could fly, but maybe there was a mutation that all of a sudden the dodo bird, there was one bird born that couldn't fly, and he did better, and he got more food, and he survived longer than his peers, and he had more babies, and his babies also couldn't fly, and they had babies that couldn't fly. And over many, many years and many generations, the dodo bird came to exist where none of them flew. That's natural selection. It's that whole process of being better suited to your environment and having more offspring, and your offspring being like you. And remember, we watched the video on the rock pocket mouse with the volcano and the lava, and they kind of showed you that it doesn't take too many organisms to reproduce to see those positive traits spread pretty quickly through the population. That's what we're talking about when we talk about natural selection. If you're confused, go back and watch that rock pocket mouse video. The link is still there. Okay, number 12, are mutations helpful or harmful? They can be helpful, they can be harmful, they can be neither. Some mutations may be helpful in one situation and harmful in another. So I give you the example of having white fur. There are also mutations that you don't even know you have. They don't cause good or bad. They're just kind of there, and they get passed down without anyone ever knowing about it. Okay. Mutations are helpful or harmful, guys, depending on your environment. The environment will dictate whether or not those mutations are good or bad. 13, what are the names of the major geologic time periods? Which one do we currently live in? This goes back to our time scale again. We had the early Precambrian, late Precambrian, early Paleozoic, late Paleozoic, Mesozoic, and Cenozoic. And we are currently living in the Cenozoic time period. Okay. Difference between inherited and acquired traits. Give an example for each type. This is also important, and I think some of you are getting this confused. Inherited traits you get from your parents. They are in your DNA. An example would be what color hair you have, what color eyes you have, your skin tone, your height. All of those things that we talked about in class, you get from your parents. Acquired traits are things that happen during your lifetime. They're not in your DNA. So an example would be like getting your ears pierced. If you get your ears pierced, your kids aren't born with holes in their ears. If I work out at the gym a whole bunch and I get really big muscles, my kids will not be born automatically with big muscles. Those are acquired traits, things I've acquired during my lifetime. They don't affect your DNA, and that's really important. Okay. Charles Darwin worked with his finches on the Galapagos Islands. That's number 15. Number 16, what types of evidence do we use to classify different species? DNA is best. It's foolproof. And then behind that, we use physical evidence such as body structures and fossils when we have them. Okay, Lamarck's theory of evolution, this is going back to the giraffes. Remember, Lamarck was wrong. Don't get this confused. Lamarck was the guy who did it first, but he got it wrong. So Lamarck thought that individuals acquired traits during their lifetime and pass those on to their offspring very slowly, changing a species over time. He was the one that thought giraffes stretched their necks. We know that's wrong. Okay, it doesn't work that way. I can't stretch my neck and give birth to an offspring that has a long neck. It just doesn't work. Number 18 then asks you Darwin's theory. Well, Darwin's theory, if you remember, his book was called On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. So he's a natural selection guy. And Darwin thought that individuals in a species varied because of mutations, and that individuals that were better suited to their environment survived and reproduced more than the less suited individuals, and they passed their traits down. Okay? And then finally, those peppered moths. Remember, we did that simulation with the birds. There were two types of peppered moths, dark and light. The light blended in with the trees until the Industrial Revolution caused pollution. The pollution caused the trees to become dirty, so the black moths now started to blend in. Their numbers increased, and the white moth decreased. So we could talk about during the Industrial Revolution, the darker moths were better suited to their environment. They survived and reproduced, while the white moths were not camouflaged. They were not suited. Okay, go ahead and read through that answer. Like I said, I'm going to post the answer key so that you can see it directly. So here's what I need you to do. Now I need you to go into your classwork feed and take your unit test. Now in a classroom setting, we would have sat down and did a multiple choice study test for this. But obviously we can't do that here. You may use your notes. You may use your book. I would ask that you don't use each other. You're on the honor system there, though. I really want to see that you understood what we learned over these weeks, and we really took a lot longer than I normally would in the classroom. We kind of went slow. I hope it wasn't so slow that you were having trouble putting it all together. But this is just like a unit test that you would have in class. The multiple choice, you'll be able to see your answers. There's 2 short response questions at the end, and I have to actually go in and grade those for you. So as soon as they start trickling in, I try to keep up with you guys as you turn your work in, and I will return them as soon as I get them checked, which should only take me, within a day or 2 to get them back to you. Okay? Good luck. You guys got this. I know you can do it. Just do your best. Okay? And we will start a new unit tomorrow. All right, guys, good luck.